And then in full daylight you see the full beauty of the colours. Blue on a blue. We just get through the pathway now. The antler moths here in the daytime as well. We have a wall butterfly on. There we go. Look at the hoverflies, they're loving it. I'm going to underpaint acrylic inks with a watercolour wet into wet method, and then when it's dry, go over the top with Unison soft pastels. It's a lovely loose way to work, and you might even want to stop when it's fairly abstract, or you can go into as much detail as you like. The only difference with the acrylic inks and watercolour is that they're stronger, more opaque, and once they're dry, they can't be soaked down again. So we need to use a diffuser or slight spray to spray water on to keep it wet whilst we're still working. Here are a couple of examples I've painted in situ on plein air in stately home gardens in the past. You can see the wonderful vibrance we can get using these colours. And here's the shot that I'm going to paint from, one from my new little garden here in Lincolnshire. The equipment for this is very straightforward and simple. A couple of palettes for the acrylic inks, a pot for water, the box of pastels, the diffuser or the spray, and also a 1-inch Hake brush. That's all I'm going to need. The paper's a £140 Waterford knot, although I do prefer a hot press or smoother paper for this normally. Don't need to stretch it for this being that weight of paper. It should flatten out again afterwards. Using the Hake brush, thoroughly soak the paper with a horizontal wash coming downwards of clean water. I repeat, while using the inks, it's vital to keep the paper wet. Once those inks are dry, you can't work wet into wet with them, they won't move. So you've got to keep spraying. It does mean that if you're painting vertically like this, the paint will trickle down the paper, but with this method it really doesn't matter, it is so loose. You can't really go wrong, because if you do, you can work over again either with some of the inks, or you can actually work over with the pastels later, over and over again, and we shall use pastels with the water and water with the pastels as well. The method is still controlled accident as is watercolour, and remember that we're going to use the light colours first in just the same way. So I'm starting with my lemon yellows and working through to the darker oranges, and then right through finally to my darkest inks, and then I'll let it dry, and then I'll work in with the pastels on top. Now the underpainting's done, it's time to start with the pastels. You can work with soft pastels directly into wet paper. You can paint the pastels on. You can put the pastel onto the paper and put the water on the top and paint it all around like watercolour. But in this case I'm going to let the paper dry properly before I actually apply the pastel. Two things about wet pastel. One is that when it's wet it's about 2 or 3 tones darker, so it will dry lighter. The other thing is that water and pastel, water actually fixes the pastel, so if you paint with pastel it's then fixed as it dries. You can then put another dry coat on top without needing to use fixative at all. If you care to save all your old pastel dust, or take all the little bits of old pastel you've got left over, grind them all up and mix them together, and then add water and roll them into a sausage, you will have another pastel. You'll give yourself another grey, so why waste all those bits of pastel? Remember, I'm not trying to just recreate the photograph. I'm using the photograph to paint from, to enjoy exactly as I would out of doors. Obviously I'd see more colour, there'd be more emotion, there'd be more vibrance if I'm actually working from the real thing, but still I want to use it. So I'm painting an impression about it. I'm not painting the flower petals in each and every one. I'm working all over the paper and gradually building up one colour and each tone one to another. A bit like a jigsaw. All we have to do is put the right colours in the right shapes in the right places relevant one to another. And as with Impressionism, I'm also playing with those colours to bounce them and vibrate them off one another, as in purples against yellows and so on in the colour circle, to give me even more vibrance. So I'm letting the acrylic ink underpainting glow through the pastels and then working into the paper with the pastels to form the shapes, to cut around the shapes and to work into them. I just use the word jigsaw, and it's very much like that, because the more of these little pieces of colour and shapes that I fill in, the more the pieces of jigsaw are filled in, and so it begins to make sense and pieces together, and the leaves just begin to show and the flowers begin to show as flowers. I keep saying it over again, I know, but if we start loosely we can finish tight. If we start loosely we can finish when we want, but if you start tight you can't finish loose. So this way we can build it up and finish when we want, as we want. It may be that you really love the acrylic underpainting and hardly touch it with pastel. That's happened to me and with my students before now. It's also a very forgiving way of working, because if you go wrong you can either brush the pastel off, you can wash it in with the brush, or you can work over it with the pastel. So you can't really go wrong, because you can bring the painting back whatever state it's in. Mixed medium's a great way to work. I like using Chinagraph pencil, a black Chinagraph pencil, with this medium as well to draw in. Why not try all these sorts of ways of painting? So long as your materials are stable, so long as the paint adheres to the canvas. I mean, if you used heavy acrylic paint and it was shiny, the pastel might not take. But with the acrylic inks, as they soak into the paper, the pastel takes very well, in fact. You could use this technique with almost any subject matter. I'm not quite happy with this background area here, although the rest of the painting is sort of almost satisfactory. This bit to me is standing out still too much, so I'm going to come in with a brush and water again and work over it and darken it down and push it back a bit, which is something you can do with this medium because it's so versatile. So we can use both the water and the pastel, because the water will mix with the pastel just like watercolour. There we go, that'll do it.